These young men and women, they knew what they were signing up for, okay, when they came in here. They knew that this was sometimes going to be dangerous.
Welcome to the Cops and Riders Podcast. Your host, Sergeant Patrick O'Donnell, worked the streets in one of the nation's largest police departments for over 25 years. Ride along with O'Donnell and his expert guests as they help you navigate the oftentimes confusing and misunderstood world of law enforcement. O'Donnell and his guests on this show do not represent any law enforcement agency. The content of this show is not meant to be legal advice. You think you need a lawyer? You probably do.
Hey, Cops and Writers, thanks for being here with us today for another episode of the Cops and Writers Podcast. I'm Patrick O'Donnell, and I'll be your host for today's show. This show is listener-supported, so thanks to all of you who keep the show going. I would especially like to thank those of you who are patrons of the show. Your generosity helps pay for the software, equipment, and my time producing this show. Yes, you too can become a patron for less than a cup of coffee or a pint of Guinness. Just go over to patreon.com/cops and writers. With historical shortages in law enforcement today, departments have to find ways of augmenting positions that were traditionally done by sworn law enforcement officers. One option is to have civilians working these jobs. On today's show, we will be highlighting the trend in crime scene investigations being civilianized. Some departments have embraced this a long time ago, having 100% civilians in this role, have a blend of civilians and sworn, or have dug their heels in and refused to have civilian crime scene investigators. On the show today, I have two crime scene investigators for the Prince George's County Police Department. William Bill Greene, who was hired as one of the first civilian C.S.I.s 42 years ago, and Frank Carson, who served as a sworn law enforcement officer with distinction for 35 years and after retirement, went back to his department as a civilian C.S.I. Bill and Frank both have incredible pedigrees that would take up most of the hour we have for the show. Frank has worked as a detective, fatal crash investigator, CSI, and other valuable roles with his department. Bill has a very long list of impressive credentials and 42 years of investigating just about every type of crime imaginable. Please enjoy this conversation with two pros as we map out the future of law enforcement. Frank Carson and Bill Greene, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Bill's never been on the show, but Frank is a returning champion. You were on way back.
Episode 11.
Is that what it was? Wow.
Episode 11. Yep.
I know. I knew it was like in the top 20, the first 20 that I ever did.
Yep.
And what is it? Crashing into traffic investigations with Frank
Something
Carson.
Like that. Yep.
Yeah, that's what I did, because I was always fascinated with crash investigations. I spent my time on the street, as a copper and then as a boss, and I always loved seeing you guys come up to the scene. It's like, okay.
And we love doing it.
And my cops hated doing it. So, and as a cop, I absolutely hated doing it. So for us, it was the motorcycle cops that did the crashes. That's how they more or less segued into being a traffic investigator. Is that the way it was with you guys?
No, we have motormen, but the motormen do their motors thing, and we have a separate collision analysis and reconstruction unit that is, I'm obviously not with them.
Yeah.
But handle fatal crashes, critical injury crashes, and do traffic enforcement, DUI, and things like that. But a couple of our motormen have been through like level 1 or 2 reconstruction class, but they don't handle traffic crashes, which is apparently I'm finding is in some ways kind of unusual in the law enforcement community.
It is. I interviewed Jerry Palladino. He is down in Florida. He's the motorman.
Right.
You're familiar with him?
Oh, I've heard all your podcasts.
Oh, okay, yeah. Jerry has a huge YouTube following. He sells courses. He has motorcycle instruction courses for beginning, advanced, all levels of motorcycle riders. I'm a motorcycle guy, so I love watching his YouTube videos. And I interviewed him, and he's like, "Yeah, we don't do crashes." And I'm like, a motorcycle cop that doesn't do, he says, no, the Florida State Patrol does all the crashes. I said,
Right.
even like in the city? And he's like, yeah, they just come and take it. And I'm like, so you get to ride around on a motorcycle, have the cool boots, and you're not taking accidents. You're just pulling over speeders and doing, traffic
Yeah.
enforcement. And I'm like, my jaw dropped
Yep.
because that's the main reason why I did not become a bikeman was I don't
Yeah.
want to be
Surprising.
scratching out accidents all day long. It's like, nope, no,
Yep.
thank you. So let's start with you,
Nope.
Frank. Let's start with your career. And can you say where you work right now, or is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, go
I
ahead.
work. I currently work with as a civilian, a crime scene investigator with the Prince George's County Police Department, which is outside of Washington D.C. I started that career. Well, prior to that, I had numerous jobs like you do when you're younger. I worked with the basic ambulance unit, worked with a medic unit. I worked in what I call a basic emergency room type situation as an emergency room technician, working with patients. And I also worked in a trauma center, working with patients as a trauma technician. 1988, I went into police academy, spent 35 years there, retired in the beginning of 2023 as a sworn officer. Of course, was in patrol. I did a stint as a district evidence technician for our investigators. I was a detective for a while. I went to our informational services doing computers and all that kind of stuff. And in 1998, I went in the reconstruction unit and stayed there for 25 years. And there I taught and put together classes, specialty classes. I testified in court, been qualified as a witness 21, as an expert witness 21 times in court. I retired from there, and there's a job opening as a crime scene investigator. And as I tell people, 45 days after I retired, they foolishly hired me back as a civilian, and
Yeah.
I I have been doing that ever since.
So the big question, Frank, is when are you gonna retire?
Yeah, I've got friends who say if you stop moving, you die.
You do.
So no, I'm gonna be. I'll put it to you this way: I will do it. There will probably become a day, and my FTO told me there will come a day in your police career where you'll wake up one morning and say, I'm done. And one morning, Buffy, I will wake up and say, I'm done.
Yeah.
And that'll be it. So when that day is, I don't know. We'll see.
Well, it's quite handy to have that ace in your pocket.
Yeah.
That's all the guys that I worked with that had 25 years plus. I'm like, when are you going to pull the pin? When I feel like it. And it's like,
Well,
oh,
I
okay.
will put a time limit on it. Civilian retirement is 30 years. I'm not going to be 93 years old doing this job. So,
If you are, Frank, we're gonna come and we're gonna put you in a rubber room and we're gonna have a long talk if you're
absolutely.
yes.
Absolutely.
There's more to life than that.
Yep.
But
Yep.
let's go over to Bill here. Now, Bill, you began your career at the Prince George County Police Department as a crime scene investigator in
I did.
1982.
Yes.
Are you still
Yes.
doing this?
Well, I got hired by the county in 81. So April 20th, I'll have 45 years total with the county.
Wow.
But I got hired by the police department as a crime scene investigator. Back then, it was called evidence technician. But the TV shows renamed all of us crime scene investigators a few years ago, obviously. Um, uh, the interesting thing was, I actually was applying all over the state of Maryland and even out of the state of Maryland to be a police officer.
Yeah.
Well, I applied to Prince George's County because my brother-in-law was here and I grew up in the county. And I said, well, I want to serve the community like my brother-in-law was doing. And I applied, took all the testing and so forth, but the academy class was full. And then the following academy class was canceled. And coincidentally, they had this position of evidence technician, crime scene investigator. And the recruiter looked at my resume and said, you know, you would be really good. We have another position called evidence technician that you would be great in. And it was a civilian position. I went, well, maybe I'll do this until the academy starts or something like that. And I looked at it and I had started, and Pat, I fell in love with it.
Okay.
I really did. I just I worked with and still work with some of the most amazing men and women, that I have ever met in my life. I was just speaking to one of the gentlemen who was here when I started this morning, and we were talking about careers and so forth. And I said, you know what? I said, I remember my very first day that I came in. I really didn't know what to expect, but I remember that we were cooking filet mignon on the front porch and eating corn on the cob. And I
Wow.
remember thinking, this is the greatest job in the world, and they're going to pay me for this. And that was the beginning. Then in 2021, I got promoted to supervisor. I was a crime scene investigator on a Friday, and then on Monday, came back in, and suddenly I was in charge of a squad. That was eye opening. And then in 2014, I was promoted to manager of the crime scene investigation division, which is comprised of the evidence unit, computer forensics, and video analysis. People ask me all the time, like as you did, you know, when are you going to retire? And I've thought about it, but I can honestly say I am one of these people that's truly been blessed that there has not been a day in my career that I have not enjoyed coming to work and working with these, civilian investigators and the police officers and detectives. I still learn from them today after 45 years.
Wow. Now, Prince George's County Police Department,
Mhm.
that's not a sheriff's department?
No, we have a sheriff's department, but it's separate from the police department.
Oh, wow.
And we, as Frank said, we're right outside of Washington, D.C. We sit between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore City,
Okay.
um, for reference. We have, Frank, help me out here. How many sworn officers do we have?
Yeah, it depends on who you talk to.
Yeah.
It's going to be somewhere, and someone I'm sure will jump in and correct me at some point. I want to say 1,200, 1,100, something like that. But I haven't kept up on it since I retired, really.
Okay. So about 1,200. Now, has the CSI stuff, has that always been civilian in that department?
No, that's what's interesting. I was the second civilian hired, and a lot of police agencies are going to civilians now
They are,
because
yes.
they they are able to hire young men and women fresh out of college with a degree in forensic science. And one of the things that's important to point out is some people want to come into forensics with a degree in criminal justice. Well, criminal justice and forensic science are truly apples and oranges. If you have a degree in criminal justice, you want to be a police officer. If you want to work in the forensic community, you have to take the hard sciences, and you are going to school for forensic science or forensics investigation.
Hmm. That's interesting because, like, where I worked in Milwaukee, when I first started, it was all sworn.
Yeah.
And it was forensic technicians that would
Mhm.
go to a crime scene. And we also had a photo car.
Yeah.
And the photo car was a guy with a 35 millimeter camera that would just take pictures. They wouldn't collect evidence. They wouldn't dust for prints. They wouldn't try to, well, DNA really wasn't a thing back then, but it was all pictures. And he was I think he was probably the happiest guy on the department because we had our own photo lab. You know, we processed our own photos, and again, for the kids out there that just know digital, we had these things called 35 millimeter cameras that there'd be a roll of film in your camera, and there'd be what, like maybe 36 or 24
or 12.
or 12. That's
Or
right.
12.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
12.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I remember I was a big photography buff when I was in high school and college, and I took like different photo classes when I was in college, and I thought it was so cool that you can go in a dark room and develop these pictures and all that good stuff. And that's what we had, our own dark room at the police department, and then we did all of our own processing of all this stuff. And it's just, now is just such a totally different world, and we've all seen it evolve through the years. But again, it was all sworn law enforcement that did the CSI stuff, the forensic technicians. And forever they were talking about, well, we're going to civilianize this. We're low on numbers for cops. Obviously, everybody is. They're hurting for full duty people. And it's like, we should probably hire civilians. They started doing that. And it's funny because a couple of months ago, I was at like police headquarters getting my new HR 218 ID. And that's in the photo processing area, the CSI area, blah, blah, blah. I said, hey, how's it going with the, switching over? Is there any sworn left? Because they're not going to like fire them, or, they threatened to banish them back out on the street. And there was wailing and mashing of teeth, and that did not happen. But what they did find was they didn't want these young kids, fresh out of college, being with these salty old cops. So they put them on opposing shifts. They don't want them even talking to each other. They put them in different rooms. Because at first they're like, well, these would be good mentors. They'd be good, people to train these people. And they're like, oh God, their attitudes changed immediately. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, this department sucks. Oh, blah, 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 blah. They became grouchy and old, and they're like in their mid-20s.
We'll be right back.
What's the craziest thing you saw when you were a cop? My first week on the job, a guy running at me with a butcher knife. He just killed his brother over the last hot dog. That's chapter 1. There are 33 more. Police Stories, The Rookie Years, just launched. Available now on Amazon. Search Police Stories, Patrick O'Donnell, or click the link in the show notes. Back to the show.
My experience was a little bit different. I came in, I was 23, 24 years old. And I was a young kid, and there were 9 people in the crime scene unit, 2 being civilian. The rest were all sworn. I am of the opinion, and I know that we're going to get comments on this from directors of other labs saying, no, it should be all civilian. I have fought to keep sworn and civilian together. Okay. I believe that the civilians can learn a lot from the officers. Okay. And the officers actually do learn a lot from the civilians who come out of college, with a degree. I like the mix. Now we're going to move eventually through attrition to all civilian.
Sure. And that's what we're doing. Yeah, that's what we're doing.
But looking back at my career, I am so thankful that I was trained by sworn officers. I learned a discipline from them. They never treated me differently. They never looked down on me like, oh, you're just a civilian. And I can tell you that police agencies that try and separate them, almost invariably, it's a disaster for them, because they end up with a lot of in-house fighting.
Sure.
Where we don't have that. We don't have sworn versus civilian here. And I attribute that to the fact that we treat everyone the same here, which means everybody gets treated poorly. So,
Frank
so
looks pretty worn down there. Yeah, he
he
looks pretty beat
you
up.
know, we have beat poor Frank up, okay, but I I wouldn't change my career in terms of working with the sworn for anything in the world. I remember, and there are little things, Pat, that the civilians don't think about. And I remember riding with my FTO, JT Moore, who I'm still in touch with, who was a phenomenal FTO. And I remember one night we were working evenings and he had me driving, which was also one of the neatest things to be driving a police car. And
Yep.
we are one of the few agencies that civilians are trained and we can run priority. And I remember he said, let's go get a cup of coffee at 7-Eleven. It was about 10 o'clock at night. I'm not thinking, what do? I pull right up in front of the 7-Eleven. And he goes, stop. What are you doing? And I'm going in to get us a cup of coffee. He goes, nope. He goes, back up, pull over here to the side, and we're going to sit here for 2 or 3 minutes and see what's going on
Sure.
inside there, because I don't want to walk in on an armed robbery in progress. And you know what? Those things have stuck with me today. Okay. It drives my wife crazy if we go to a restaurant. I don't want to be sitting with my back towards the door.
Absolutely.
Okay. Because I want to see who's coming in. Now, that means my wife and I have had that hard conversation of, if I ever tell you to get out, don't ask me why. Okay. Just do what I'm telling you. Okay. Type thing. And she understands that, I think pretty well.
So was there any pushback? You said that you guys got along pretty well. You're only one of 2 civilians in that
Yeah.
Department. There wasn't any pushback because you were not a sworn officer?
No, I cannot think of one single incident. In fact, maybe a little bit the opposite. Sometimes I think they forgot we were civilians. I would be riding with my FTO and he would see a traffic violation or a robbery would go out, and the next thing I know, we're running priority, and I'm sitting there scratching my head going, I wonder if he's forgot that I'm a civilian here. I don't have a gun. So no, we never had a problem. I know other agencies have,
Sure.
but I've really been very fortunate in my career. The officers have treated the civilians very well. I will tell you though that there have been times that supervisors have come in now and said, oh, well, I'm going to send this officer to this call because, it may be a little bit dangerous. Okay.
Oh, sure.
And I've had to go to them as a manager and say, don't do that. You can't do that. If you want to separate this office and pit sworn against civilian, start doing that. These young men and women, they knew what they were signing up for. Okay, when they came in here, they knew that this was sometimes going to be dangerous, and you have to use common sense.
Sure.
Okay, so
and
it happens.
Most of the time when you guys would show up, it was well after the fact, that something happened.
Yes.
But
Exactly.
but you're also in neighborhoods where stuff can pop off at any moment. That all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, hey, I didn't expect that. Or hey, look what's happening down the block, or whatever
Yeah.
the case may be. Now, I assume, are you guys like in the same uniforms?
Yes, we
Okay.
are.
Now,
Yeah.
obviously, I'm guessing that they give you vests.
Yes, they do.
Oh, we're not in police uniforms.
Not police uniforms. It's
The C.S.I.s.
BDUs and a
Okay.
polo shirt.
Oh, okay. Okay, but
And it has the county seal
patch
on
on
it.
there.
And
Okay.
it does say police on it.
Okay. Now, you're wearing a vest. Are you armed?
No.
Do you have that
E-
option or
Even
not?
though no. The only police agency that I've found in the country, and I'm sure there's others, that their civilians are armed is San Diego, and it's an option for them. But if they opt to be armed, they have to go through all of the same training uh, that the sworn officers do. They have to qualify every year and so forth. I'm sure there's other police agencies, I'm going to guess in the Midwest and maybe even Texas,
Yeah.
where you, when you're born, they hand you a gun,
Yeah.
type thing.
Everybody's got a gun in Texas.
Everybody's got a gun in Texas.
Sure.
So yeah.
Yeah, because I have a buddy that was a copper in Milwaukee, and he moved and he wound up at Vegas Metro.
Yes.
And they went civilian for their C.S.I.s. And he said it was great because you have these young kids coming out of college and they were excited to actually go to a crime scene. And they just thought it was the neatest thing ever. And he said, you know what? They always got prints. In Milwaukee, we had, if you saw like Joe or Jane, you're like, they're not going to find anything because they don't want to find anything.
Yeah.
They're a coat hanger. They're an empty suit. That there's, yeah, oh God, way too many of those. And in Vegas Metro, he said, I love these new guys. And on top of that, he said, they get vests. And if they want a gun, they could have one. But they, like you said, they have to qualify. They have to go through the training.
Yeah.
So they go home, they tell their wives and their husbands, and it's like, yeah, you're watching CSI on TV, and it's like, I'm actually in a police car, and I'm wearing a vest, and I'm wearing a uniform, and I got a gun, and I'm doing CSI stuff all day. This is the coolest job ever.
Yeah, I have a concealed carry, and probably 3 or 4 of our civilians have concealed carries. I've had mine on and off for a number of years. I'll be honest with you, Pat. I rarely carry the thing. But now, having said this, and I'll get a lot of flack from people that live in Baltimore. My daughter is a nurse in Baltimore, and when she was going to school there, that was one of the few times that I actually put my gun on. I never felt the need for it working.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, a few years ago, we were working a homicide scene, and the suspects were in the woods, and they fired a shot at the apartment, and the round went through the apartment where our civilian and sworn C.S.I.s were working.
Oh boy.
So it is a dangerous job.
Sure.
It truly is.
Yeah. With law enforcement, you never know. I mean, it could just happen.
Yes.
That's very common, actually.
I had a gentleman a number of years ago that jumped out of a car with a gun while I was sitting at traffic light.
Oh.
And that was an interesting confrontation that we had there, but obviously it ended, well. And it was, and you probably know this feeling. I think any police officer does. The greatest sound, that I heard was in the distance, those sirens coming.
Oh, absolutely.
To my rescue. And I think I even told the guy, I said, you need to understand that. Do you hear that? That's the cavalry coming. I said, so you keep your hands right here on the car. I said, and there won't be any problems. I said, because if I get hurt, they're going to be really ticked off at you.
So let me ask both of you guys this, since, Frank, you're doing the CSI stuff now. I am fascinated by how different departments handle the same crimes differently than like what I did back in the quote unquote back in the day and still today, where say you've got a homicide, somebody's shot in front of their house, you got a dead body, the scene isn't like too crazy. You got lots of yellow tape or maybe some red tape up there for an inner and outer perimeter. We started doing that like towards the end of my career. Now, how many CSI people are going to show up compared to detectives?
It depends on the day of the week.
Okay.
When I first started, Pat, if I got a homicide, I handled it myself from start to finish. Okay. That's different now, and it's much better now because we will call out on call people. So we will have people there running the Faro scanner, taking photographs. One of the CSIs will be the primary, and he will kind of oversee that forensic investigation.
So, how many
That
CSIs?
was actually that was a hard
Go ahead, Frank.
that was a hard thing for me to get used to because coming from Crash, I handled everything: search warrants, subpoenas, diagrams, collecting evidence, next of kin notifications, identifying the person, fingerprinting, autopsy if necessary. So I get the crime scene unit and I get to like my first, like I went to a death investigation with FTO and I'm looking, okay, there's his ID. So I wonder if he still lives there. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. That's not my responsibility now. And I go to a homicide. It's like instead of me doing the diagram and everything, if I'm primary, one person's doing the diagram, one's doing Pharaoh, one's doing this, one's doing that, and I'm like kind of like I feel like I'm not doing as much as I should. So that was hard to get used to.
See, like for
You
us,
you are Frank, I can tell you, just so
yeah,
you know. You're doing enough.
he's an overachiever. He's an
He's an
overachiever.
overachiever.
Yes. So, like, say, I just talked about that homicide. What would happen is obviously the cops would get there first, and a sergeant. Sergeant would call for resources, and our homicide unit would show up, and the CSI people would show up. Now, what would happen is the homicide, either a sergeant or a lieutenant from the homicide unit is going to show up with a small army of detectives. They are going to be the ones that are going to process the scene as far as they're going to do the diagram. And I'm talking about the wheel thing, measuring from, the guy's head or crotch, to
Mhm.
like, say, the fire hydrant or something fixed.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
doing the crime scene diagram, you have one guy. And then you're going to have another detective that's going to work in concert with the CSI person that once, they take the photos, like say there's a gun on the front steps. Okay, obviously you're going to want a ton of pictures of, from every angle you can think of the entire scene. Then you kind of like shrink it down a little bit. Then now you're taking, very specific pictures of, like any casings or the weapon itself, et cetera, et cetera. And they work in concert. And then once all the photos are done and all that, most of the time that homicide detective is going to take the gun, not the CSI person. And then they'll take it like to the lab or whatever if it has to get fumed or whatever the case may be. And I talked to other departments, other people in departments where it's like there's a small army of CSI people and one or two detectives, and that's it. The detectives will do a walkthrough of the scene, and then it's like, okay, you need to be out of the scene. So the detectives are actually looking for witnesses, interviewing witnesses, trying to develop leads on a suspect and following up on that lead while the scene itself is the C.S.I.s baby. That's their world. Like, I think of like say the UK. I've interviewed detectives from like say in England or Ireland, and they're all putting on the Kydex outfits with the booties, and I mean they go way way over the top, and the cops can't even come near that scene. Their detectives might do a walkthrough. Sometimes they don't even do that. They're like, this is our scene. You go, you do your detective stuff. We're gonna do the CSI stuff. What is it like with you guys?
Well, I think, Pat, one of the things that keeps running through my mind, I think we have to talk about what our responsibilities are. Okay. We don't handle breaking and enterings or theft from autos like a lot of crime scene units. We are primarily responsible for, and Frank, if I miss one, let me know. We go to homicide, death investigation, suicide, rape, storefront armed robberies, physical and sexual child abuse. And did I miss any, Frank?
Those are the big ones. I mean, we
Yeah.
get called for occasional, like we found a piece of evidence, come and get it, type thing. And we process carjacked vehicles. in the homicide vehicles.
Tarzans.
And
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
I would assume you do arsons too.
No,
You don't do.
we
Oh, wow.
we assist the fire investigators with any arson cases that result in a death. Okay. If
Wow.
it doesn't result in a death, we don't have anything to do with
So
it.
if you're not going to those, the other crimes, who does that? The regular street cops?
No, no, well, in that case, the fire investigator does all the forensic evidence
Yeah.
there. The street officer would handle the breaking and enterings, theft from autos, things such as that. I think it's important to point out, though, we have a good relationship with all of our detectives, and we really work hand in hand with them. One of the things, though, that I will say that I've watched over the years is with hiring these young men and women um, with degrees in forensic science is they come in here and they can hit the ground running. They they have an understanding and a grasp of the crime scene that probably 30 years ago we didn't have,
Mm.
because you got to remember back in the 80s there were no forensic programs in any colleges.
Right.
It was
Right.
criminal justice.
Yep.
And it's only been in the last 15, maybe 20 years that we've seen just about every college um, has a forensic science program. Now, having said that, I think I need to say for the young men and women who are looking for a career in this, not all colleges that offer forensic science are created equal.
Sure.
Okay, they're just simply not, and we see that when we do interviews. I'm going to give a shout out here to WVU, West Virginia. They have one of the best, and there are others, okay, but we hire a lot of young men and women from WVU. Their forensic science program there is phenomenal. Um, you know, so I think that if somebody is looking for a career in this, look for a college that is truly recognized for their forensic science programs.
Gotcha. Now, to circle back, so say I do have that homicide, how many detectives to CSI people? What would the ratio be?
They come out as a squad, and oftentimes there can be as many as five uh, homicide detectives, but they're busy doing things, interviewing witnesses, doing neighborhood canvasses, um, and they really, I think, and Frank, tell me if I'm wrong, they really trust us to handle the scene,
Yeah.
appropriately.
Yeah, pretty
We,
much.
yeah, we do recover the handguns, we recover the drugs, we recover the money. The detective really doesn't recover anything. We recover it all.
So you document everything,
Yes.
obviously, photos first. You're going to have a zillion photos. And do you guys take video?
We don't, and I have a funny story about that. I have pushed away from doing video because we and other agencies have had minor horror stories about doing video if you don't mute the audio.
Oh, oh
Because
boy.
this is
Because cops are going to be cops.
discoverable.
Okay, I get it.
Cops are cops,
Yep.
okay? And I remember doing it one time, and this detective decided to lay out his theory of what happened, and it ended
Mm.
up all on video.
Oh boy.
And unfortunately, it was all wrong.
Oh.
So I tell people, if your agency is going to make you shoot video of a crime scene, and there's a way to do it, okay? But mute the audio, because you do not want people's opinions coming across that way.
that and whatever else that's just not appropriate for that point in
Yes,
time.
exactly.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I could I could totally see that.
Yes.
Now, I had a question for you, Frank. This is a little bit different, but it was your crash years. You know,
Okay.
in the city of Milwaukee, we got a new chief from out east that thought we were a bunch of bumpkins, and we just didn't know what we were doing. And he was so super enlightened, and he was the smartest guy in the room. All you had to do was ask him. But he he bowed to political pressures for regarding police chases, high speed chases.
Okay.
And one of the byproducts that we had from that was fatal car accidents went up 400% in 1 year. Because all of a sudden it's like, well, if the police aren't going to stop us, why should we stop for that stop sign? Why should we stop for that red light? Why should we, now it's a free for all. It turned into the Wild West, which kind of matches your hat, really, Frank. I mean, it's kind of Wild West ish,
Thank
but
you.
but it looks mighty good on you, I must say. I must say, you wear it well, my friend. But did you
Thank you.
guys ever like encounter something like that where you restricted? You brought in this policy, and now all of a sudden you'd restrict something like that, and there's a byproduct that you just didn't see coming.
Uh, we when we did our you have to remember, we modified our chase policy like in 91 or 92, not as restricted as it is now, but we modified it back then. But when they went to the except for certain exceptions, certain crimes to a no chase policy, we did not see in the years I was there an increase in fatal crashes as a result of that. Our setting is a little different from yours. Milwaukee is, of course, a city. We have a lot of open area too, and I could go into, primary causes of our fatal crashes. But the
Hmm.
short answer to your question is we didn't see a spike in fatal crashes when we changed our chase policy.
Interesting. But we did like a complete drastic change. It wasn't like an ease, like, you said like in 91, you changed your policy. And then later on, you kind of tightened that up a bit, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's and I've been out of it obviously for a couple of years, but my understanding is now is you cannot chase. You can chase for crimes involving threat of violence or violence, homicide suspects, carjacking suspects, rape suspects, armed robbery suspects. That is up to the road supervisor who can call it off.
Sure.
But the traffic only is not allowed. Stolen vehicle is not allowed.
Oh,
Just regular
wow.
theft is not allowed, things like that. And a supervisor is required to monitor the radio traffic and keep an eye on that. Now, it's Prince George's County. We have other jurisdictions, within Prince George's County have different policies. However, our county council recently passed a law that essentially said municipalities in Prince George's County have to follow the same chase policy as the Prince George's County Police Department does.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
brought that yeah, that brought a little uniformity to it. Whether you
Mm.
agree with it or not, that brought some uniformity to it.
Right, right. Which there should be, I think. You should all be playing in the same sandbox. If it just that makes sense to me. But and I don't want to make the whole show about, police chases, but there was a lot of unintended consequences that were negative
Sure,
from
sure,
doing this, where you had literally little old ladies going to church on Sunday that were getting killed because you had some asshole that just didn't want to stop for that light or that stop
right,
sign, or they're going 40 miles over the limit, and they knew there's nothing we could do. And the cars that they're
right,
driving are either stolen or don't have plates. I mean, there's no way of tracing, that
right,
back to the person. So it's
right,
like, yeah, yeah, it's like our city is debating right now about putting in stop sign and red light cameras
right,
in the city. And my biggest complaint with that, and a lot of other people too, is your biggest offenders are the criminals who are driving around in stolen cars. They don't have plates, or they steal a plate, they put it on their car or whatever,
right,
and they're going to rack up how many different, like stop sign or red light violations. Then this poor person who got their car stolen, they're responsible for it. And they have to jump through mega hoops to get it, because we would have stolen cars and just like parking tickets. They're like, hey, I got this notice in the mail saying that my registration is now suspended or revoked or whatever, and it was stolen. And they're like, well,
Right.
you need a copy of the stolen vehicle report and blah blah
Sure.
blah.
Yeah.
And I had people coming back and say, I did that, and they still won't do it. And I'm like, I'm sorry, there's there's not a whole lot we could do for you, but
Yeah.
there's again unintended consequences happen from some of these things.
Sure. Understood. Yeah.
So that part sucks. But anyways, let's get back to CSI fun stuff. Bill, you had a pretty cool case. I was looking at your resume here, your bio, and one that jumped out at me is 1986 Prince George's Hospital nurse who was charged with killing more than 10 nurses. Tell me about that. That's awesome.
That that was an interesting case. Um, I got involved because, well, let me back up. Um, one Saturday morning, three nurses came to our homicide unit. It was early in the morning, and they said, we need to talk to a homicide detective. We think one of our nurses is
Wow.
killing her patients.
Oh man.
And so obviously all the bells and whistles, went off, and, they started interviewing them, and come to find out this nurse had, I, I I'll I hesitate to say because I'll get the number wrong and I want to be accurate, but the national average, she far exceeded the national average of uh, patient deaths,
Mm.
when in her care. And as it turns out, she was injecting them with potassium. Well, what potassium does is it basically throws them into respiratory arrest. Um, and so the last one that got everyone's attention was a young man who was 27 years old. He was scheduled to be released in a couple of days. There was no reason for him to die. And he did. And it really pushed these nurses to come forward. And I just think to this day how brave they were to do so. We ended up doing, and I ended up doing the exhumations of three of the victims, okay, patients that had passed away. And we did tox. The problem that we ran into was potassium chloride is naturally found in the body.
Right.
And it's one of the few chemicals that dissipates in the body over time. So when we exhumed these bodies and we did tox, all the levels seemed normal. Okay. So
I'm gonna
she ended up being,
I'm gonna stop you now.
yeah,
I would see a big hurdle is for if you're exhuming bodies, obviously time, uh, the environment, decay, all that good stuff. But
embalmed.
also the bodies are embalmed, right?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
you're getting what, vitreal fluid from the eye, or were you getting the fluid to get this stuff?
From the liver,
Oh, the liver. Okay.
we were getting it from the liver, from the heart. Um, the embalming process is pretty thorough.
Buffy,
Uh,
tell him how you know the embalming process is thorough.
Prior to my career with the police department, I was a funeral director and
Oh,
went to
okay.
school for mortuary sciences.
Bingo.
Um, yeah. So that was the reason they kind of came to me and said, hey, Mr. Ex funeral director, we have to go and do these exhumations. Tag, you're it. Okay. So, so I was like,
Oh
all
boy,
right,
what a
that's
fun
fine.
job that was,
Oh,
huh?
yeah. So it was my job with the medical examiner to go ahead and get these samples, and so we did, but it really proved nothing. The state's attorney's office at the time decided to charge her anyway and move forward, but she was acquitted
Wow.
of all charges. She did lose her nursing license. And it's one of those cases that I think back, with technology today, is there anything we maybe could have done differently? Okay, what else could we have done? And when I sit there and I really think about it, that's another one of those cases where some people just get away with murder.
Yeah,
And I think that was the case there.
but 10 murders? I mean, that's a
And
whole lot,
and
man. Holy
and
cow.
that's a conservative number,
Right.
Pat.
Who knows?
Yes.
Exactly.
Because
Now,
she had worked at other hospitals.
oh boy. How long was this person a nurse for until this came up? Do
I
you know?
want to say 5 years, if
Huh?
my memory serves me
You could do a
correct.
whole lot of killing in 5 years.
Yeah, you can.
Was she working with Dr. Kevorkian, or was her name Kevorkian?
No, but actually, we called him Dr. Boyd, who had his own TV show,
Mm.
very well known pathologist. We actually called him in, and that's who we were working with.
Now, when you were exhuming these bodies, did you literally have to take them out of the caskets, go to like an autopsy suite, and
Yes.
do the whole shooting match? You couldn't just like do a liver panel or something, or
No,
oh,
we,
oh,
they did an entire autopsy on the body because since it was now being ruled a homicide, most of these people, the doctors had simply written it off. But now that it's a homicide investigation in the state of Maryland, it's a law that if you're conducting a homicide investigation, you must do a full autopsy.
now
And so
correct.
every body, all
Okay,
three bodies, were fully autopsied.
now correct me if I'm wrong. The casket goes into like a sarcophagus.
It goes into a vault.
Yeah,
Yep.
and
Yep.
it becomes, you get your in the afterlife, you have your own jacuzzi more or less because
Yes.
it just fills up with water, right?
You know what? That really depends on where they're buried. It also
Okay.
depends on what kind of outer container vault that they're put in. If the state requires at most cemeteries that you're buried in a concrete receptacle,
Right.
okay, but you can purchase a vault, and the vaults are supposedly they're airtight.
Hmm.
I've seen other bodies that have been exhumed before, and they look good, and there is not um, the fluids that
Yeah.
you were speaking
Right.
of. These, I of the two were in pretty decent shape because they were less than a year
Okay.
old in terms of being buried.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think any of them had been buried for much more than a year, if I remember correctly.
Wow. Now, what would this nurse's motive be for killing these patients? Was
Yeah.
it mercy killings or was
No, I wish you know what? I almost wish it were. But there are there's a term for it, and Frank, jump in here anytime. But firefighters, for example, okay, we've had firefighters over the years, in this country, who have set
Yeah,
fires, and
absolutely.
they get excited over the
Oh,
fire.
okay.
Okay,
Okay.
this nurse, we truly believe that she got excited over the code. It becomes almost an adrenaline rush. And we think
Oh,
that was her motive for this was, and sometimes, you know, she would inject these people with the potassium and they were able to bring them back. But she was the one that was working to bring them back. So she was, you know, considered a hero in some of
okay.
these instances. So she thrived on the adrenaline rush
Well,
of the code itself.
she could always take up skydiving or, do something
We
like
wish
that.
she
You
had.
don't have to kill people. Jeez.
We we wish she had,
Yeah.
but
Wow.
Yes.
Do you know what she's doing like today?
You know, that is such a good question, Pat. And I'm almost a little embarrassed to say that a few years ago I did Google her and to try and see if she was still out there nursing, but I couldn't find anything.
Yeah, her name was Jane Bolding. I would think that
Yeah,
she'd probably change her name,
I would
because
think so too.
that's going to follow you around. Holy cow.
I I hope so. You know,
Yeah.
but but Pat, we have to keep in mind, you know, because she did get a jury trial, she was acquitted. Okay,
Wow.
so oh gosh, it's hard to say, but in her defense, she was acquitted. So I don't want to put out there that, um, she did this. She was acquitted by a jury of her peers, and we have to respect that.
Well, the burden of proof is on the prosecution.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's, even though we know, this person has done X, Y, or Z, the burden is
Statistically,
there.
yes.
That's the way it's got to be,
Yeah.
and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with
Yes.
that.
Statistically, the odds were that she had
Right,
probably,
right.
you know,
A
done
reasonable
this.
person would say yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. But the burden of proof
correct.
had not been met.
Yeah. And then one more, and we'll wrap this up. The death investigation of Len Bias. That
Oh,
I
yeah.
saw that, and I'm like, ooh, there's a blast from the past.
Yes.
What
Yes.
part did you have in that?
I was working midnights that night, and, you know, Len Bias, as many of us may remember, was a star basketball player at the University of Maryland. Um, that case was handled by a very, very competent homicide detective by the name of Mickey Ferreter, um, one of my favorite homicide detectives. And he and I were working midnights, and the communications called, and they were all excited. Said, "Len Bias has just been taken to the hospital, and he's been pronounced dead." Well, I think everybody in the office knew who Len Bias was except for me, Pat. Okay. And they're like, "You don't know who?" And I'm like, "Okay, now I do." So I attended the autopsy. I went up to, I believe it was Leland Hospital at the time, and photographed uh, his body. And um, I remember specifically going to the the autopsy the following day, and there was a lot of discussion about, well, oh my goodness, this is such a tragedy. This is the first time that he had ever ingested cocaine. Well, the autopsy report suggested something completely different. Um, Unfortunately, he had done it in the past.
Yes.
You know, so that was a tragedy. They ended up interviewing the entire basketball uh, team, the uh, young man who had brought the drugs into the dorm room. Um, I don't think he ever recovered from it, at least in terms of being able to live a normal life.
Well, they charged him, right? They
They
charged him with
charged him. They
the
did charge
yeah.
him.
We called the Len Bias laws.
Yeah. The the other interesting thing that occurred afterwards was, this was at the heart of this, Pat. This was an overdose. Okay,
Mm.
and we have a lot of overdoses, and well, we had a lot of overdoses back then in the county, and unfortunately, we have our fair share still today. But I recall answering the phone over in homicide twice, and the family of other victims of overdoses were asking, "Look, you guys have put all these resources into this death investigation, to find out who gave Len Bias the drugs. Why is no one looking at who sold my son or
Yeah,
my daughter the
that's
drugs?"
fair.
And it was a fair question.
Yeah.
It was a fair question. Um, it was political
Oh,
at the
absolutely.
time. It was very, very political. And it was something I was uncomfortable with at the time, and I still am today. Uh, that's a case that I'm still uncomfortable with. A little bit of how it was handled at the higher levels.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
and whenever, the higher level starts dipping their toes into
yeah,
your pool,
yeah,
it just doesn't end well. It's
yeah,
like you
yeah,
heard the saying staying in your lane. And as a
yeah.
boss, it's like if I had a fatal accident and Frank is going to roll up, I am going to be the last person to tell him what to do. It's
Mhm.
like, okay, you've done this 100 times before
Yeah.
and you know what you're doing, you're an expert. Why would I all of a sudden put on my expert hat and say, well, of course, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, no, go do your thing. Would you like some coffee and donuts? I'd be more than happy to have a coffee.
Yeah.
Run, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and it's cold out. Hell yeah, we're going to treat you like a
Yep.
king. It's like,
Yep.
that's for any bosses that are out there listening to it. It's like, again, stay in your lane. Don't be, just because it's high profile, it's still, a death investigation. And obviously, politics is politics. It's always going to rear its ugly head when it's high profile, when somebody gets arrested or dies or whatever. Now, all of a sudden, all the armchair quarterbacks are coming out of the woodwork. And it's like, let the real experts do their jobs.
There was a lot of fallout from that case. I think one of the saddest was the state's attorney, Bud Marshall, had been a state's attorney in Prince George's County for 20 plus years. And he was very well respected, very good state's attorney. But it cost him the election the
Mm,
following year. So that was a turning point within Prince George's County in terms of politics and elections.
gotcha. Well, I'll tell you what, we've been going at this for almost an hour, and I think I could talk to both of you guys for about 8 hours easily, but I'm going to cut it here. Anything else you guys want to add to the conversation before we say goodbye?
Uh, the only thing I would add was working now as a civilian crime scene investigator is great. I put in, Buffy was talking about having sworn people and civilians. I come in having a background as sworn officer. I know a lot of sworn officer stuff, but I learn a lot from the folks that have been there. I went in there, nobody treated me like a rookie, which was very nice, but I went through the same training program. It was a great program. Big advantage I kid people with is I went in there and the person who's my field training officer, great guy. We go to a homicide and he says, well, the homicide is such place. I'll put it in my GPS. And I just smile. Said, no, you don't have to do that. I know exactly where that is. So I bring that to the game and they bring their skills that they can teach me.
Sure.
And the sworn, Buffy, the sworn and civilian mix works.
Yeah, you got the street smarts, Frank. Where, a kid coming out of college just doesn't have the only way you get the street smarts is to actually work, on the
Yeah,
streets,
kind
so
of works.
that's a
We were
perfect combination.
we
Perfect.
were very fortunate to be able to get Frank.
Well, thank you.
I recognize that every day. But Pat, I will tell you one thing. We talked earlier about me maybe writing a book, and you have a book behind you, Never Suck a Dead Man's Hand,
Yes.
written by Dana Coleman.
I
And
love Dana, and Frank is the one who turned me on to her.
I love Dana. And every time I think about writing a book, I say to myself, I can probably not write a book as good as Dana wrote hers. Because if anybody really wants to know what it's like to be a crime scene investigator day to day, read Never Suck a Dead Man's Hand by Dana Coleman.
Oh,
She nailed it. She
Yeah.
nailed it.
absolutely. And she was such a fun person to talk to.
She is.
Yeah.
She is such a character. And again,
Yeah.
Frank, I have you to thank for that. I never would have heard of
You're
her
very
before,
welcome.
but I'm just like, oh my God. I got done and I'm just like, thank you, Frank. That's awesome. All right. Well, I think I'll end it here. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We're definitely going to have to do this again. Thank you, everyone, for listening to All Things CSI and the Future of Law Enforcement with my two distinguished guests. Frank Carson and Bill Greene. I really enjoyed my conversation with these guys, and I hope you did as well. Well, that wraps up another episode of the Cops and Writers podcast. If you haven't done so yet, you take a minute and rate and review the show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you have already, thank you. As always, thank you for all of your support, and, of course, let's be careful out there.